ways that people have preserved folklore through the generations is through mythology and folklore, and help us remember what we're doing and help us explain things that we might not always understand. And it's always wonderful for the youth to understand what's going on. And so we've talked for many years, watch the candle, because I know there's a candle. Okay, did you miss it? So we pass on our traditions, and we've called that a bardic tradition for many years, to pass on stories and to tell stories, and people will travel and tell stories in a variety of communities. So we have a story to help us remember and understand the summer solstice. And the story today is the story of Grandmother Spider. So we start with Grandmother Spider brings the light. When the earth was first made, Sky, do you remember what animal you're going to be?
Yes, fox.
Okay. When the earth was first made, it was very dark and the animals were afraid. One day, Bear said, I have seen light on the other side of the world, but the people will not share. Perhaps we could steal some for ourselves, because the bear is wise and crafty. The others thought this was a splendid idea and started to discuss who should go first. And guess who went first? Was it the fox? I'll go, said the fox. Fox went and stole a piece of light, or a yellow balloon, in his mouth. So go get a yellow balloon. He put it in his mouth, because he's a fox. But it was so hot it burned his mouth, and he dropped it. And the fox still has a black mouth to this day. Possum. Do we have a possum in the room? No, we don't have a possum in the room. Possum tried next. He wrapped the light in his tail. So what happens next?
Burned his spot.
Did, and he tried to drag it back, but it was too hot, and he dropped it. That is why the possum has no fur on his tail. Crow said, who's the crow? Crow said, let me try. Caw, caw, let me try. And he went off to steal the light, but when he got close, it singed all of his feathers and he turned black. He was so afraid he dropped the light and ran away. Finally, Grandmother Spider said, I will go. Can you guess who Grandmother Spider is? When she she was surprised by how hot it was.
Wow, this is very hot.
She thought of a plan and began to spin and spin with her silky, shiny web. Soon she had enough for a bag. She approached the light and, quick as a flash, tucked the light into her bag. When she got back, the animals were triumphant. Hooray for Grandmother Spider. Can we all give Grandmother Spider a hooray? Hooray! Grandmother Spider, they all shouted. Grandmother Spider was happy to give them the light. We should hang the light in the sky so all can be warmed by it, she said. The other animals thought that too was a good idea, but how to get it in the sky? I will go, said Vulture. He took the bag of light and put it on his head. So guess who Vulture is? It was hot, but he could stand it. He flew higher and higher, and the bag got hotter and hotter. He climbed higher and higher, and his feathers turned black. Still higher, and the feathers on his head burned off. Still higher, and his head turned red. At the last possible second, he threw the light into the sky as hard as he could, and the sun hung bright and beautiful, warming all the land, not just the people. So that is the story of Grandmother Spider bringing the light.
Is there going to be another story?
Not today. We might do another one later. So I wanted to bring you that story, and then we could talk about some of the symbolism that's involved with that story in the summer solstice. And so if you think about it, in the Native American pantheon, all of the represent something. Because you don't necessarily want to pick on Gavin for being bald, but you might joke around about a vulture. And you might want to make Lars do something because he's tall, but you don't want to necessarily say, oh, Lars is this behavior. You want to say maybe grandmother spider. And we could have easily used Yvonne with her knitting, or Carol, you knit as well, Carol with her knitting to be the spider, to create the web to hold the sun. So what ultimately comes from this story is the vision of how they all came together to be stronger. Right? They all worked together. They didn't all succeed, which is something we have to remember in our daily life, is that we don't always succeed. But sometimes we can turn to our friends, especially the fox, because the fox is wily and crafty. And all he did was singe his mouth. He didn't burn all his hair off. He didn't turn completely black. Right? So there's a lot of takeaways from the story. The fox is one of the more crafty animals. The bear is one of the wisest. The possum is one of those hiding animals, one of those receding. Raccoon and possum or mouse are known for their eagerness to hide. And so that you may have a person who identifies with those animals may have more secrets. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Not everybody needs to be as open or as honest as I am. And again, all of our beautiful differences
Like as honest as I am.
are what makes this world so great, because we all bring our differences to the table. Crow has some very strong imagery about truth-telling and calling the shots. And Grandmother Spider, of course, is the crafty, wise old woman that everybody needs the wisdom and the counsel from.
So we could live without the fox and every other one, and we can live without spiders, what you're saying.
I don't think we could live without any of those, Scott. I think we need everybody's differences to make the world a better place. What do you think?
We can live without the fox. No, he wants to steal stuff.
That might not be something we need to talk about with everybody. So then we have the vulture, right? And lots of people think of the vulture as maybe not a positive, maybe not the best, that the exterior of the vulture isn't always pretty, that the vulture doesn't eat the nicest food. But do we need that? Don't we need something to help clean us up? Help us clean up our act? Somebody once offered me a bib and I said, oh, I need that. That's very important in my life. I need to help cleaning up my act. So the vulture has its place too. And I was working with children once at the summer festival, and it was on a very large campground, and the Zook's septic service came through because they come through and clean the porta potties twice a day when there's 2,000 people in the campground. And one of the kids, Ezra, said to me, oh, that's just awful. And I said, does your porta potty stink? And he said, no. And I said, so how bad is it really? And he said, oh, okay. That everybody has a place. It may not be the place that you expect to be. It may not be the place that you desire, but it is the place you're meant to be. And everybody offers us lessons and opportunities to learn and grow, be they negative or be they positive. So, that was kind of a quick summary of the story. I'd like to open it up for discussion. We probably have about 20 minutes for discussion before we wrap up. So, who would like to discuss or have input?
I have a question. If I can ask it.
Absolutely.
In the pagan times in England, how did they go about celebrating the summer solstice?
That I don't know. There's lots of rumor and conjecture. One of the longest arguments I had with somebody about celebrations and timing of celebrations was about the actual timing, about, did they do it with a calendar? And I said, these people didn't own paper or calendars. So, they might have marked a time with a stick.
Mark it, yeah.
Right. And they definitely watched the moon and the sun, and that's why they have those monuments.
They kept time very accurately. We know from Stonehenge that they knew at the 32-year cycle, for instance, of the sky, eclipses within a day without any difficulty, so I don't think they have much trouble in getting the summer solstice, because that's the time the sun sets over the heelstone at Stonehenge.
And once you, because I have kind of a different perspective having grown up with the Wiccan tradition, I have a real feel for the wheel of the year. And so there are things that I do that I've had, you know, Appalachian folk come to me and say, you're doing that correctly. When I was living out in Summers County, we had a grape arbor, and I would trim it back right around Mabon. And it was just I had to go trim the grapes at that time. I didn't research it on the internet, none of that. I just needed to go do it at that time. And one of the neighbors stopped and pulled in the driveway, and he said, yeah, I haven't seen anybody do that since my grandmother. He said, and this is exactly the time of year that she would do it, right around September 20.
Really? So that's when you trim your grape arbor?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect intuition, but I know, I feel the motion of the new moon, and I'm planting more in the last 2 weeks than I will in the next 2 weeks. It's just kind of how my feelings go and my response to the cycles of the planets.
That's really interesting, because where I grew up in New Hampshire, we always trimmed ours in February because of the bleeding.
Right.
And that's really interesting. But obviously, by September 28th, most of those have already blossomed and borne fruit. Right. So they wouldn't have much to bleed.
Right. So it's less to keep alive over the winter.
Right.
That is the right time also. That that fall, Mabon, and then prior to the equinox, the spring equinox, are the times that you want to catch your plants. And so that trimming goes right in alignment with the initial breeding of animals for the northern hemisphere. It's very different the closer you get to the equator, and then down south of the equator, it's all
Joe, I
reverses
think
the
you
cycle.
had that calendar as a graphic on something that you
On the
posted.
stuff for the newsletter, the
Okay.
e-newsletter.
That's where I saw it, and I'm wondering if we can't find a copy or do something with that copy that we can display here in the fellowship.
I had planned to print it out.
Yeah.
For the fellowship, I'm not connected with my printer well right now, so I'm not really sure what I've done.
Well, I'll print it out, and
Okay.
we can, coloring is so big right now, we can have
Yeah.
a coloring session.
And I haven't talked a lot about the symbolism of the summer solstice. I picked up the story, Grandmother's Spider, but I haven't talked a lot about the symbolism of the summer solstice and what that means in the wheel of the year. So if you guys have questions about that, I'll be happy to do what I can. These two, the experts in the room.
Sure, talk about it.
Okay.
Please.
Well, the summer solstice is the height of the solar year. So it is the longest solar day. And my understanding is that this year it is tomorrow, and at the end of the height of the solar day, we have also a full moon. So it's a time when people's energy is very high. And Carol, you've probably had this experience coming from Alaska about we have something, lunacy with the full moon. So I don't know if there's a solar sea or the summer madness that comes.
I think it's more noticeable because of the long hours of daylight there, and just listening to the radio, every day they would say, you've got this many hours of daylight today, and every, minutes that changed every day, you'd hear the difference in the minutes. And I know in Fairbanks they have a Midnight Sun Festival, but they had it yesterday, and people seem to be more in tune to that, because then in the winter, of course, you have so many hours of darkness, and it's just, I just found it more noticeable, and people were more in tune to the seasons there because of that.
I was supposed to take it if we changed the time.
Thank you for the information. We never did a whole lot with summer solstice. I think as a child I remember 1 or 2 summer solstice rituals in 15 years. So it's one of my weakest remembrances. But you in the spinning of the year, this is the time of planting and harvesting. People are bringing in their first crops, like the hardier vegetables. There are many people who planted spinach before the last frost that they're reaping that harvest. We see stuff with the farmers markets. Collards, I think, is something that's coming in well, but then they would have a second growth. You can definitely get a second growth out of them, so that you would harvest them again towards the fall equinox, or actually probably given the growth cycle towards the beginning of August. So you have what I would consider a much more feminine time of the year, because I think of, when you think of hunter-gatherer culture, that the women are typically the gatherers and the more female version of that hunter-gatherer culture. Although I'd be more than happy to go out and kill a few things with a bow and arrow. Sky.
We have loads of dough at the shop, so if anybody wants to stop by and grab some, you're welcome to do so.
So it's time to
We
gather
have
some dill.
loads of them. It's like, I was as tall as you by now.
Yeah, it's getting tall.
Time to gather some dill, right? So, and then as we head towards the fall equinox, we look towards what is considered the masculine time of the year, the hunting time, when things are killed and put away for, or salted, cured meats to be put away for the winter. One of the symbols that I have felt very strongly, having grown up with this culture, and again, this is probably as much invented as it is true, is the fire celebrations that we have at each of these points in the lunisolar calendar. And by lunisolar, I mean a moon and sun calendar, following both of those and following those natural rhythms. And so I know that there are many people who had summer solstice bonfires in the last week or so. So there was a celebration in Fairbanks. And as you go through, there is the cutting of the Yule log and the lighting of the Yule log, which happens at the winter solstice. And so that log is typically cut before that and laid into the hearth. And I've wondered, and I've asked Gavin about this, if that log was not the log that was erected for Beltane and lit for Beltane, and then as the Beltane log burns down, that we have our final burning of the Beltane pole, right? Our nice, not too gently obvious phallus symbol in the field. That we have that pole that we're burning through the year, and then we take what's left of that, the embers of that, and take it to our hearth as we get into the winter season. And so that we have a Yule log that we use to help us remember the summer and getting ready to have the sun return, because the winter solstice is our longest night. As we get ready to celebrate our longest day, we have to remember and be grateful that we have the longest night. And so if you think about pre-printing press cultures and pre-internet cultures, you think about what were people looking to? And when you are cold, what would you want to think about? What do we want to think about when we've struggled to drive into Beckley from our distant locations? We think about sunny days and clear roads. And so if we have that intuition, that may be an intuition passed down to us from many generations of people who've lived through 4 seasons and would like to celebrate the sun. And then eventually, as the fields get burned up and they're hot and dry, we look to the cold. And we look to celebrate the cold as much as we celebrate the heat. And so, just like with this story of how each animal has its place, we can be grateful, if not always excited, about our 4 seasons, because they do interesting things for our earth. And every part of the world has 4 seasons, but they're a little bit more difficult to see from our traditional background when we go to the equator and see that they have, a season of rain, a season of mosquito, a season of rain, and a season of mud. They don't, bless their hearts, they don't get snowmen like we do. So that I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of babbling. So do you guys have further questions, more things you'd like to discuss about this?
We must remember that fire was not the easiest thing to make in those days, especially in wet climates like England. So keeping the fire alive was very important.
And that's why peat was so beneficial, because it would
Yeah.
smolder and you could fan it back into flame. Scott, did you have a
I
question?
know a little bit about peat. Like, it explodes to, like, make its spores airborne.
Peat?
Yes. Like, shoots them.
Okay, any further comments, thoughts?
Whenever I think summer solstice, I think of my two friends. The three of us would put on summer solstice services at our old church in Maine, and they always called us the summer solstice sisters.
No.
Yeah, it was just, it's a great, I love summer solstice.
You've shared some of those with us.
Yes.
I've learned more and more about it over the years. It's
Yeah.
My parents are not big fans of the heat. So.
Well, to me, the only hard thing about summer solstice, it means now every day is going to get a little shorter.
know.
Agreed.
You
Absolutely.
lose a little light every day.
Right. We get it coming to the hottest part of the year, but the days are getting shorter.
Yeah, yeah,
Because we're getting ready to head into the dog days.
yeah.
Yes, Sky.
At least kids get to catch fireflies sooner.
Yeah.
True. Did you have? We caught a firefly last night. It was in the front windshield of the car and stayed
Yes.
with us from Huntington to Beckley.
My goodness.
Yeah, neat, so neat.
Huh?
And it was almost our little guardian regarding when you think of all the things we saw.
It was a difficult drive home.
Yeah.
I would say also, speaking of, go back to your story for a second, we really do need vultures to clean up things.
Yes.
Vultures are, I think, some of the only birds that eat dead things, which is what we do. We eat dead things.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's,
Yes, and even though they look so ugly to the viewer, they really do serve a wonderful purpose.
They're just
Absolutely.
adapted to the desert.
And when they were overhunted, it was obvious very quickly once they were overhunted that they needed to be restored.
yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Are we ready for our closing hymn?
Yes.
I think that's what we need.
SLT 146. We might have better luck with the stereo, but if not,
Maybe look
we'll
for
have two
another
verses
stereo.
to muddle through. We'll have
We can do a cappella on this one for you. It's a different CD then. Louder.